Welcome everybody. Welcome to Studium Generale. Welcome to our guest speakers, of course, Sjak, Smulders, Fabio, Braggion. Tomorrow, December 10, the Swedish Central Bank Prize in Economic Sciences, in memory of Alfred Nobel 2025, or shortly, the Nobel Prize for Economics, will be reached out to Joel Mokyr, Philippe, Aghion, and Peter Howitt. We thought it was a good idea to introduce their work by some of our own best economists. So here we are. First, Fabio Braggion. It's Italian. It's Italian. He will take the stage. Fabio is Professor of Finance and Financial History here at Tilburg University. His expertise lies in financial history, fintech, banking, and corporate finance. He completed his PhD under Nobel Prize winner Joel Mokyr. Fabio will discuss Mokyr's work on the historical roots of innovation and the interplay between scientific discovery and technological application. After Fabio, Sjak Smulders will take the floor. Sjak is Professor of Economics, also here at Tilburg University, and his research examines the impact of environmental and energy policies on economic growth, as well as the sources of economic growth in different contexts. Sjak will turn the modern theory of growth by Nobel Prize winners Philippe, Aghion, and Peter Howitt. Their model formalized creative destruction as a continuous process of innovation and replacement. Sjak will explain all you need to know about it. After their talks, there is plenty of room for questions and discussion, but now it's up to Fabio Braggion. Let's rehearse all. Braggion. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, As, for the introduction, and thanks a lot for having me here and being here. So I start. So let's meet. Okay, so as As said, the first part of the talk will be dedicated to one of the economists that won the Economics Nobel Prize this year, Joel Mokyr. It is one of the official pictures from a Nobel Prize committee. Has been my advisor during my PhD. He actually has some Dutch roots. He was born in Leiden in 1946, and he still speaks a fluent Dutch. Went to live to Israel, and then going to the United States to take his PhD at Yale University. And then, since 1974, he has always been professor of economics and economic history at Northwestern University at Chicago. Joel is an economic historian, and most of his work has been done on understanding the roots of Industrial Revolution, that was his first year in the Netherlands, or better, his PhD thesis was about explaining why the Netherlands didn't have an Industrial Revolution like Britain had. Then he opened a parenthesis while studying the Great Potato Famine in Ireland and its causes, to go back then and having a broad study about the Industrial Revolution again in Europe and Britain. And if you read the document of the Nobel Committee, Joel won the Nobel Prize exactly for the studies about the origins of the consequences of the Industrial Revolution, our understanding of the Industrial Revolution. So my talk would be mostly about this part of his work, the Industrial Revolution in Europe and the UK. Overall, generally, and Jacques will tell you even more about that, this Nobel Prize is really about economic growth. What is economic growth? Just to introduce the topic, is fundamentally an increase in the amount of goods and services that a country produces, which usually we measure every quarter or every year. And why is it important? Well, if a country grows, if an economy grows, it can produce more. In average, we become richer, so we can consume more. Firms have more resources to invest, either in physical capital or new technologies. And also governments have more resources to spend in public goods and services for people like us. So it's important because if there is lots of economic growth, we can achieve higher living standards, so better housing, for instance, better food. You will see also a graph about that. We can bring more people out of the poverty line. Then at the same time, the government can produce better public services like education and healthcare. And again, we have more resources to undertake more innovation, R&D, and so on and so forth. So Joel is an economic historian, so I need to give you something of a long-time perspective. Historians, what do we know about economic growth? It's a kind of a funny thing. So this is a graph where on the horizontal line I have years. And on the vertical line, a measure of welfare of people, which is GDP per capita, income per capita. And what do we see? That I'm starting here 1,000 years before Jesus was born. For a long time, either you are born around the 0 or you are born in the 500 AD, you are more or less rich or poor in the same way. Nothing really changes. You see there are bumps of ups and downs, but you see that the world didn't really experience sustained economic growth. Up to a certain point, 1750 about. After that, you see that economic growth becomes sustained, important, and doesn't revert back to the level of that you see before. What is the moment of 1750? Here is it, is the Industrial Revolution. So why the Industrial Revolution is important? Why do we study at school? Why is a topic worth to awarding a Nobel Prize? Because it's really a turning point in human history. That's the moment where economic growth became self-sustained and not reverting. The period before is known as a Malthusian trap, and I know Sjak will give you more details, at least the Malthusian so-called perspective about it. So, first of all, second, importantly, so this is here fundamentally the same graph, starting again in 1000 BC, arriving more or less today, where I'm plotting the black line, again, GDP per capita, a measure of economic welfare, but other measures of welfare. For instance, the proportion of people that are no longer, here, in the green line, the proportion of people that are no longer in extreme poverty, life expectancy, or people living, proportion of people living in a democracy, you see that all the lines were fairly constant before around 1750, then to pick up later on after 1750. We suggest that economic growth is also brought welfare to people in many other dimensions. We brought us out of poverty, we can have better food intake, which is measured by energy capture, we are more likely to live into democratic countries. Also, a few bad things came out. So countries after 1750 have more war-making capacity, which makes sense. They are richer, in principle, they have more money to spend into weapons, and that comes with it, comes also with economic growth. So, how can we rationalize the differences between before flat line and later more vertical line? So that's around, again, the Industrial Revolution. But in a way, the growth process was somehow different. And Joel Mokyr will tell you the following thing. So before 1750, you need to think about the economy as a rowing boat, where we are all there rowing, pushing the boat to go forward while rowing. So you can row harder, which is we can trade with more people, we can open borders, and as a result having countries trading with each other and getting richer. We can create better institutions, inventing courts, rule of law, making better finance. But at the same time, we cannot go as fast as faster than a certain limit because our human strength just limits us. And on top, any little shock, I get a disease, I get injured, will compromise my strength in rowing. So reverting, possibly reverting any gain I made before. What happened after 1750? In the boats we installed an engine. What is this engine? Technology or technological progress. So the engine now allows us to just go faster. And even if as a rower I get sick, it doesn't really matter because the engine will keep on going. And that's the way you need to see the pickup in GDP per capita after 1750. So our economies installed an engine, and as a result they go faster, and as a result are more resilient on any negative economic shock they can get and preventing growth to go higher. So this, what changed in 1750, or better, around 1750, is the coming of Industrial Revolution, which I think many of you, if not all of you, studied at school. So what is the conventional view we have about the Industrial Revolution, what we study at school? Well, something that happened in Britain, something that happened between the 18th century and the 19th century, something that happened especially in Europe, first in Britain, then spread to Europe, and then North America. What is about? A shift into mechanization, that's what we learn at school, from handmade production to something manufacturing which is more machine-based. And we know there have been many inventions around 1750, 1800. For instance, in the textile sector, I think all of you heard steam engines. I will give you lots of examples today with steam engines, which is the way is the king or the queen of the innovations of the first industrial revolutions. New ways to make iron. And also, we start to see growth of factories. Before, people were producing mostly at home. It's after 1750 that you start to see more systematic, at least, people working under the same roof, which we call factory. Why this is matter? For a reason I told you before, increased productivity and raised economic growth. So this is the conventional view. You need to think about the work of Joel Mokyr producing a new type of view of industrial revolution and enhancing our understanding of industrial revolution. First of all, he created a taxonomy of inventions. So we all agree there have been many inventions during the first industrial revolution after 1750. Joel categorizes these inventions into two big groups, macro inventions and micro inventions. Macro inventions, in a way, as the name says it, are the big things that are really changing the way we produce goods or services, the way things are done. Here I wrote a radical breakthrough. Example of macro inventions, again, the steam engine, which transform heat power into mechanical power, into mechanical movement. And again, considered to be the queen of invention of the first industrial revolution. And then also another example is vaccination, which happened around the 19th century, the idea of inoculating a zoonotic virus into your body, so to prevent that the true virus will infect you and make you sick. These are all major developments that really change the way we produce things, or we see things, or we create things. Next to the micro invention, we have micro inventions. Micro-inventions are improvements, incremental improvements over the macro-invention, the big breakthrough. So once you create a totally new technology, people start to work on it and make it better, make it more productive, make it more efficient. Example, again of a steam engine. Once the first steam engine was done, many improvements were made. The most famous one, I'm sure you know the name, was done by James Watt, which in a way created a separate condenser within the steam engine to make the engine itself more efficient. Another way was people overall knew how to make iron. By the first industrial revolution, an important micro-invention made the production of raw iron more efficient. So how Joel Mokyr sees the first industrial revolution? I summarized it in 3 points. So it's a technological phenomenon, first of all. So industrial revolution has to be seen as a clustering of a big invention, of macro inventions, that all together brought into a large wave of improvements or micro inventions. So think about a cluster from 1750 on of big inventions, again the steam engine, or also in textile, that in a way spurred a sort of wave of improvements of the same inventions, which we call micro inventions. So this is what it is. Second, think about it as why in 1750 and not in 1250 or 1000 before Christ? Why in 1750? So what triggered the Industrial Revolution was a change in the way we think about knowledge, was the diffusion of the emergence of what Joel called useful knowledge. The idea that knowledge is not something that has to stay with us, cannot be shared with other people, or is something that among our club we talk about it, but we don't bring it to production, we don't bring it to our daily life. After 1750, there was a philosophical shift that said that now knowledge is something that has to be used to improve our livelihood, to improve mankind. It is fair and good to apply it on everyday life problems, such as improving a certain machine, a certain technology, and so on and so forth. Third, so the second again is, why in 1750? Because we think about knowledge in a different way, especially in Europe. Third, why in Britain and not in Italy? Well, why first in Britain and in Italy later? And Joel will give you an explanation based on the idea that Britain or the UK had a comparative advantage in producing micro-invention, had a set of very qualified workforce that was particularly good in implementing all the ideas that came from a new conception of knowledge into usable machines that could be applied into production. Now, I will give you a little bit of overview now of 1, 2, and 3, and dig a little bit deeper of what I want to say here. About 1, so first of all, I want to give some context about what are these inventions I've been talking about. So first of all, as I told you, steam power. So the steam engine was invented by Thomas Newcomen in 1712, then perfected by James Watt in 1769. And once the steam engine was invented, it was applied into motion, into moving things. So first of all, it was put into boats, creating a first type of steamboat that don't work anymore with rowing or sailing, but are powered by an actual engine. And then, as you probably all know, into steam locomotive, creating the idea of railways. This is about steam engine. And then you can also think about another important development that we had during the first industrial revolution, that are new technologies in textile. And above here, textile, I always like to separate it into spinning, so making a yarn, and weaving, making a cloth. So spinning, here you have the famous spinning jenny and the spinning mule that mechanize the activity of making a yarn, allowing the production of multiple yarns at the same time by the same person. And then here you have about weaving, the creation of a water frame of a power loom, which are now new mechanized type of looms and weaving machine that produce cloths at a larger scale and cheaper. In fact, before 1750, most of the textile was made by hand. It was very expensive. That's why people in average had fewer clothes, because it took a long time to make them, they were very expensive. After 1750, you start to see, and here I have a graph, that the price of textile in the UK falls dramatically. So these type of inventions were not something nice to see. They really had a real impact on the livelihood of people. And these are index numbers. As you can see here, I have years like before, starting in 1770, because it's the first year we have data about textile prices, and I'm arriving about until 1830. And here basically I have index numbers indicating prices of units of textile good. The blue line where I want to start is cotton. And you see, the price of cotton is normalized to 100 at around 1800. You see that already between 1717 and 1800, the price declines of about 50 percentage points. You arrive at 1830, the price becomes less than half of what was in 1800, in 30 years, which is a huge decline in the price of cotton yarns. Same idea is true for the green line, which is linen. Same idea is true, although with a little bit of a delay, for the red line, which is wool. The yellow line fundamentally indicates a weighted average of all the three, total textile products. So all these innovations matter for people because made price of an important staple in their life extremely cheap, or cheaper. Second, why 1750? So I already gave an introduction. So why 1750 or not 1250 or 1350? This is a little bit of an historical puzzle. So it's not that before 1750 the world did not experience some spurt of economic growth. I'm Italian in the Netherlands, so in fact when we study pre-modern Europe, Italian city-states and the Dutch Golden Age come to our mind, right? So let me give you a graph. Again, years on the horizontal line as usual. On the vertical line, I still have a measure of how well off were people, GDP per capita, income per capita. The blue line is my country, Italy. The red line are the Netherlands. And you see I'm starting, again, where I have data, about somewhere around 1350. Let's focus on Italy, the blue line. You see, now this is, you see the GDP per capita grows between 1350 until more or less 1450. This is the Italian Renaissance. This is a spurt of growth that you see when you go to visit Venice or you go to visit Florence. But you see, after 1350, we don't grow anymore. We kind of stagnate and we don't experience any more sustained economic growth. A bit the same idea for the Netherlands. So you see the red line, after 1400 and picking up especially in the 16th century, this is the Dutch Golden Age, which makes sense. You guys tend to grow a lot throughout the 16th century. You arrive at the peak around the first half of the 17th century, but then also you see the growth at that moment blocked and didn't go anymore. Now I'm going to present you exactly the same graph, but I make it somehow longer. I give you a longer time series, blue line still Italy, red line still the Netherlands, but I'm putting the graph a little bit longer, not stopping more or less in 1750, but going until the 20th century. And I do also another thing, I'm adding England, or better, the UK, into the graph. And you see the green line now is England. You see that after 1620, England starts to grow, and especially grows a lot after 1750. It does not revert back. The Netherlands, again, remain constant. These are the Napoleonic Wars, but after that, Industrial Revolution, mechanization picks up also here, and we grow. Same idea for Italy. So every growth spurt that you have been seeing in the modern era, pre-modern era, pales in comparison of the type of growth again that we experienced after the Industrial Revolution, after the first Industrial Revolution. So the question is why? Again, why at this moment? What happened here that didn't happen here that produced this type of growth? Yes, the Industrial Revolution. But why the Industrial Revolution happened in 1750 and not in Venice in 1420? That's somehow the question. So the idea of Joel Mokyr is the following. So sustaining economic growth so growth, first of all, is about ideas. So we grow because we invent new things, and to invent new things, we need ideas. And how can we divide ideas? Ideas can be divided in two ways. So a group of ideas can be called propositional knowledge, which is about why do things work. So for instance, when you think about the steam engine, in order to understand why a steam engine works, you need to know something about atmospheric pressure. You need to have an idea about thermodynamics, that hot gases expand and cold gases tend to shrink, creating vacuum. And then this goes together with prescriptive knowledge. How do things work? Once I know what are the principles that are driving a steam engine, how can I build a good steam engine? So the first part, propositional knowledge, is really about science, understanding the basic principle behind techniques and phenomena. The second part is about prescriptive knowledge, is how do I build these things? How do I make them work? Okay? And after 1750, these two types of knowledges started to talk more about each other. Before, the communication between people who knew and people who built was not so fluent. After 1750, the two words came together and started to communicate more and more. So what changed? So it started to happen that after 1750, science explained more and more clearly why things worked. Engineers and artisans improved how things worked while knowing what science was saying. Every time an engineer was working on a new machine, he created a new empirical puzzle, a new scientific puzzle, which was picked up by scientists, creating new knowledge, making new theories, that then went feedback into new machines. So in a way, there was a self-sustaining engine of innovation. Knowing why things work, help to understand, to make things work better, working on making things work better, enlarge our science, and then feed back into making better machines again. That was the loop. And let me give you an example, again, on the steam engine. I don't know how much you're familiar with steam technology, but the first steam engine was actually put together by this guy, Thomas Newcomen, which was a man born in southern England, and by the way, was really not a trained engineer, he was actually a Baptist preacher. And what he did was, he built this machine based on a trial and error that used the idea that, again, hot gases expand, cold gases shrink, and this can move a piston within a cylinder. That was the whole idea. The machine was terrible. It was huge, mostly used to pump water out of the ground where you are mining for ore or coal, incredibly polluting and super inefficient. About 75% of the energy generated was wasted in the process. And Newcomen had a sort of an idea of why the steam engine worked, but really couldn't flesh out the science of it. Was some sort of a tinkerer, somebody who was able to work very well, putting things together, but really didn't know why precisely his own machine was working. But people seeing that this machine was working saw some scientific puzzle. So what is heat? How does pressure work? Why there is so much energy lost into this machine? So the technologies start to bring science into the picture just to improve the machine. Just to give you an idea, so this is the typical Newcomen steam engine. I didn't do this, I just found it on Wikipedia, by the way. And that was a very simple machine. You see, you boil water, the water creates steams, the steam has enough strength to push up a piston within a cylinder, then at a certain point the piston has to come down, so you inject some cold water here to make the steam again water, and then the piston falls down again in the cylinder. This movement of ups and down allows you to pump out, on the other side, water from the ground. So James Watt saw this machine, and while he was working on it, he was an engineer repairing one of these machines. Notice something that looks obvious to us. So why this machine is losing so much energy? Well, we are using the same chamber to heat and make cold water or steam. So within the same chamber, something becomes hot and something else becomes cold. This is not efficient. We can make it better. How do we make it better? Another machine this time got from an internet site. This is a Watt steam engine. Here I'm heating my water. The steam comes from above, pushes down the piston. But notice now I'm going to cool down the air, not in the same chamber where I'm heating the water, but in a different chamber called the condenser, so I don't mix hot stuff with cold stuff. The heat part remains hot, the cold part remains cold, and this allows me to conserve, make my machine more efficiency, and don't waste heat or cold in the process because I'm separating the two chambers. What makes Watt special? Vis-a-vis Newcomen, he already had some sort of scientific training and scientific knowledge. He had a basic preparation in mathematics, instrumenting design. He knew theories of atmospheric pressure were developed in the continent, for instance, by Evangelista Torricelli. He was a Scotsman. He knew, for instance, Joseph Black, another guy living in Glasgow like he did, and which was a scientist which was the person who discovered the idea of latent heat, how much heat you need to make water into gas and make steam into water, which of course is central to the idea of steam engine. So by being exposed to all the science of heat, steam, and water, he could come up with the idea of creating a separate condenser. So that was the type of inventor that had a good scientific background and scientific knowledge which could apply into a working machine. And at the same time, the Watt steam engine, the one that perfected and created the two chambers, the heater and the condenser, created yet more scientific puzzles. So scientists start to become interested in understanding why the efficiency of a steam engine rises with the pressure created by the heat. What does limit heat transfer means? How do gases expand? And in fact, later on, in 1824, Sadi Carnot and other scientists produced the first theoretical model that really explained in a formal way how a steam engine works. And then later on, we all probably knew this guy, Clausius, Kelvin, and Joule, used also the knowledge coming from the working of the steam engine to develop the first law of thermodynamics. So practice that fits into science, while science fits into practice into men like James Watt perfecting the steam engine and making a steam machine. Why didn't work before? So again, this happened around 1750 and later on. Before, science wasn't working in this way. So this is a print from Leonardo da Vinci, my countryman. Leonardo da Vinci designed marvelous machines. He's known to be one of the first person who designed something that looked like an aircraft. He had an interest into human anatomy, here the skull, or here a human eye. He had an interest into machineries. But nothing of this really went public. So he was writing for himself. Notice Leonardo was writing from the right to the left, not from the left to the right. Already in a way they made the production of his own science and in his own knowledge less to be shared with other people. He didn't publish into academic journals. He didn't go to conference explaining it. He did not participate into scientific societies trying to make his knowledge more widespread. was a knowledge to be consumed by himself and people around him, but not for the bigger public. And that's why the ideas of Leonardo da Vinci became something nice to see, but didn't really have an impact on the creation of new technology, and remained something on that paper, but didn't have a widespread application. Why science and technology started to talk to each other around 1750? We know that the 18th century is the moment of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment, according to Joel Mokyr, is really the trigger, the intellectual trigger that brought science to talk to engineers and engineers talk to scientists. And this guy started the whole thing. The English philosopher Francis Bacon, who lived between the 16th and 17th century. So Bacon was really the first one who started to say that the main purpose of knowledge was to improve mankind's condition rather than the mere satisfaction of curiosity. So we need to move out from a Leonardo world where we do things because we are just curious, where we keep them for ourselves, into resolving problems because these problems can be applied and made the livelihood of people better. So knowledge, he thought, had to be public, systematic, shared, and useful. And these ideas, in a way, allowed the flow of information between people who knew, the scientists, and people who knew what to build, and reinforcing the cycle that I showed you before. And greatly, access, because of the idea of Francis Bacon, were picked up by Enlightenment philosophers later on, the access cost, how much you need to spend in terms of time in finding information, in finding knowledge, was reduced enormously. For instance, we know that around the 18th century, a little bit before the Industrial Revolution, the first copy of Encyclopedia was published, the famous Enlightenment Encyclopedia by Diderot and D'Alembert. And the encyclopedia was what you imagine now, so lots of volumes with various entries put in alphabetical orders that explain the basics of machines, phenomenon, and anything you can think about. What I like about the encyclopedia is how graphical it was. So I give you here a few examples of the Encyclopedia of Diderot. This is the part of human body and human skeleton. So of course the handwriting is not really perfect, but you see this is basically a plot of a human skeletons. Each bone is categorized, denominated, and explained. So it's visual, it can be easily accessed, you can see what I'm talking about. The same idea is when you talk about ballistic or the art of defense. There is the draw of a cannon shooting. There are drawings measuring and explaining what is the right corner for a ballistic machine, for an artillery, when you need to shoot into a wall of a city. And also, this is a plaint on how to make glass making. So again, very visual, very accessible. Not too many things are written, but you can open and see. And again, categorized in alphabetical order so that people can know, have a way, a sort of shared way to access the knowledge which is into the encyclopedia. So knowledge becomes more accessible. You can also see it also in the diffusions of scientific journals or journals that are talking about knowledge in various dimensions. This is for Europe. And you see that before 1700, in Europe, you have less than 200 scientific journals that have been published. Then you see that the number goes at about 200 right before 1750, then to reach its high numbers, more than 1,000, almost 1,500 after 1750. Idea that once I got to learn something, once I established something, I want everybody to know it. So what do? I write a paper and I publish it into a journal. Also, what I find interesting is how much these journals tend to become more predominant into applied sciences like technology, medicine, and science, and a little bit less in philosophy and, too bad for me, social sciences. But you see, this is about applied type of things. And this is Europe in total, but you see that every country in Europe is contributing to this trend. So UK is even not doesn't have the largest number of scientific journals. Germany has large numbers, but then the Netherlands, Switzerland, and the Scandinavians tend to have larger numbers. But of course, this knowledge, once it's printed, can be easily transported, shares into other countries. So whatever thing was written on the Swiss journal was not prevented from reaching the UK and being used by UK scientists. We also know, in fact, many UK scientists learning, for instance, German, to be able to read and understand what was written in the continent. At the same time, another way through which knowledge was spread out was scientific societies, which becomes, so meetings, Masonic lodges from time to time were scientific societies. So clubs, meetings that in a way were meeting regularly talking about sciences or engineering. And you see that this number greatly increased again after 1750. Last note. So this is, to summarize, so the Enlightenment lowered the access cost to knowledge, allowing science and people who make engineers to talk to each other, reinforcing the loop that I mentioned before. Last point, so all this that I described, you saw it in the graph, is a pan-European phenomenon. But at the end of the day, we know that most of the inventions were made in Britain. So what did Britain make so special also vis-a-vis other European countries? Well, according to Joel, the view of Joel Mokyr here is that British workers were just more productive than other European workers. First of all, we were better fed, which made them more productive, and so they were paid a higher wage because they produced more things per unit of time. And second, Britain had a very good apprentice system that allowed workers to be especially handy in dealing with practical stuff and bringing science into the efficient development of new tools and machines. So about the first one, so British workers were better fed, healthier, and as a result more productive. I can show you a few data that Joel produced. One way to see whether the well-being of people is, for instance, to see the height of a people. Especially when you go back in history, you know that better fed people or people living into healthier conditions tend to be taller. And here I have data coming from people either in jail from Britain or in the army, where systematically we're measuring the heights. And I have here starting 1780 and then coming until 1820. However, you see that an average British male was about 1.68 m tall, about 3-4 centimeters taller than a French soldiers. So British people tended to be taller. And also, British people tended to live longer. So this is life expectancies. So how long can I live in expectation at birth, dividing between England and Wales and France. And here I have various ways to estimate it. It doesn't matter. But you see, if you focus on the first two panels here, you see that the average life expectancy in Britain is about late 30, early 30s, and is higher of France. So British people also tend to live longer. Then, about the apprentice system, we know that in Britain, these are various areas in Britain, various counties and regions in Britain. We know that when the apprentice system was better, so the cost was higher, and here is lower, mechanical skills in the area were also better, more widespread. So better apprentice system, more mechanical skills. More mechanical skills, again here on the horizontal line, add more people to work into textile, which is one of the high-tech industries of the first industrial revolution. This to say is that a good apprentice system led people to learn better applied engineering, and applied engineering led more people to work into textile and produce more textile goods and improve textile machineries. So my conclusions. So as a good friend of Joel Mokyr said, and one of my mentors as well, Deirdre McCloskey said, this is very much a Nobel Prize that acknowledges that ideas made the modern world, the importance of ideas, of human ingenuity, which creates technology, and technology, we know, generates economic growth. As somebody working in the university, it reminds me of the importance of communication between people like us working in academia, but also the outside world of the industry and regulation, and the importance of communicating between each other to improve livelihood of people and improve our understanding and knowledge of, in my case, social and economic affairs, but more in general also of engineering and practical affairs. It also reminds me very much of the importance of scientific research, because what people were developing in the 1750s was sound science based on experiments, based on proof, based on understanding. So again, it's a Nobel that reminds us that scientific research is an important part of economic growth, but it has also to be applied and used together with industry in communication with industries and people outside academia. Thanks a lot.
So if we go to the official description of the Nobel Prize, we see that Joel Mokyr only got half of the prize, and the rest of the money was shared by Philippe Aghion and Peter Howitt. And they got the prize especially for developing the theory of creative destruction. And we are going to see how there is some overlap between what Mokyr did and what Aghion and Howitt did. So I think the picture that was distributed by the Nobel Prize Committee tells a lot. Fabio didn't dwell too much on the picture, so let's go a little bit about it. So you see the staircase to heaven, heaven of great economic prosperity. The staircase gets bigger and bigger, but it only gets bigger because the next step is being put on top of it, but at the same time kicking out the previous owner of the step. Right? And that's the creative destruction thing. You can only create a higher level of economic welfare by allowing the previous top producer, top income earner to leave the stage. That's the idea of creative destruction. So it combines creation and destruction. And creation here should be read as creation of new products or better production processes. And destruction should be read as losing jobs. So that's why this guy falling off is probably, hopefully having a soft landing in the security net, right? So keep this picture in your mind. I think at the end we can maybe criticize a bit this process of creative destruction. Do we agree with this process? Maybe we can also see that it's not exactly what Peter Howitt and Philippe Aghion said. Well, I hope this will be a nice journey for the next 20 minutes. So who are they? Well, if you are an economics student, you all know Philippe Aghion. He's a very visible person in the community. Every conference you visit, he will be there. He's a talker, he's a socializer, he loves to talk. He starts soft and then starts pushing his ideas and speaks louder and louder and gesticulating like a Frenchman. So it's a bit of background, but it's nice to see that he teams up with Peter Howitt, who is the Canadian soft-speaking person. Nobody knows him. I've never met him. He's a famous person, but he doesn't visit. And the two team up to bring out a very beautiful theory. So they explicitly got the prize for developing the theory of an idea that's not so new. It's not so revolutionary to realize that new jobs come because you kick out the previous type of jobs, right? That's not so new. Of course, all the mobile phones you use nowadays are here because they replace older generations of mobile phones, or even, well, that's a very normal process, we all know this. But the key thing is that the two put this in a tractable model that can be used in further analysis for the economy. So let's see what we do. So let's explain the key idea behind their path-breaking theory. So we start at the macro level. So here we see a picture that's zooming into the last part of Fabio's picture, only after the Industrial Revolution. So it starts in 1800. And you see, it's amazing. It's amazing. So you see that both the UK and the United States, and we could repeat this for other rich countries, they grow at almost always 2% a year, no matter what happens. So you see the big dip because of the war, the Second World War? Yes, but it's only temporary. So it's the opposite of what Fabio shows before 1750. Then it was every time you get a little bit of growth, but then you fall back. It's the opposite. You always have growth. Sometimes you fall back or you go a bit faster, but you always go back to the same growth rate. That's amazing. Yeah? So we call this steady growth. You start growing and you keep growing and it goes on forever. Yeah? Yet, if we go to the micro level, the micro level, that contrasts a lot with what happens at the macro level. At the micro level, it's completely the opposite. If you have a nice grocery shop in the 50s in your village, soon you will be replaced by a big grocery store in the neighboring village, and you lose your store, you lose your jobs. Well, and this happens all the time. Even ASML, the big champion of our region in Veldhoven, they are now the biggest computer writing machine producer, chip making machines that we know. But of course, at some point they will be replaced, and then all of a sudden our whole province will be, probably in unemployment, right? So this enormous turbulence in markets is very normal at the micro level, that is at the level of jobs, at the level of firms. And this picture is illustrating this. So here are firms that see the same employment between, let's say, 1983 and 1993. So over 10 years they can keep the same level of employment. But that's only a very small bar, so there is only very few firms that can maintain the same level of jobs over time. To the right are firms that can expand their employment, so there is many that can double their employment, so these are firms that double their employment. And there is also very firms that lose a lot of employment. And actually the firms at the very left side, they lose all employment, they go out of business. Yeah? So it's a very diverse picture. You can never be sure whether you keep your market or not. And now the challenge is to explain the two pictures. How can it be that for the economy as a whole, the economy is always growing, but for firms, you're always losing at some point your market? Well, the answer comes from Aghion and Howitt, and they built a theory in which they explain that the two things are, two sides of the same coin. And maybe it's this coin, which is the Nobel Prize medal they got. So why two sides of the same coin? Well, the economy can only grow if there is better products, cheaper products, new products. Who is introducing these new products, these cheaper products? It's new firms. Typically, new firms bring the new products. And that must mean that the old firms should give way to the new firms. That means that on the firm level you get the turbulence, but in the macroeconomy you can keep growing. That's the whole idea. And this, as I said, is not a new idea. It was one of the big ideas from Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian economist who was working first in Austria, then fled to the US because of the war. He already wrote a few books, and he, in the beginning of his career, very much stressed this effect of creative destruction. I think he invented the term as well. He also stressed a lot the role of entrepreneurship. It's new entrepreneurs that bring new things, that make new combinations of things, that make better the life of people and the productivity of firms. And we should accept that this goes with loss of jobs, he shows. Yeah, so Aghion and Howitt managed to put this into a tractable model that we can use for forecasting, for explaining things in the economy, but the original idea was already in Schumpeter's work. So AH stands for Aghion Howitt. They seem to be fully agree with Schumpeter, but only with part of Schumpeter's work. Because Schumpeter later on found out that, you know, not all innovation comes from entrance into the market, from new producers. think of our big companies like Philips in the old days. They actually did a lot of innovation. They introduced better products, well, better television set. They learned a lot about how to improve their own products, and they did a lot of innovation. So actually a lot of innovation comes from big companies. So later on, Schumpeter shifted a bit to the idea that a lot of improvement comes from our big industrial heroes, or big entrepreneurs. They help growth. And it's this tension. We still don't know exactly, is it that we mainly should support small new firms, entrants, because they are maybe more creative, or should we mainly protect employment and creativity of the big firms that have the money, that have the ideas, that have the skilled workers, they have the experience, maybe they grow much. So this is still the debate. I mean, if we want to know how we should let Europe grow, let productivity improve, let living standards be maintained in Europe, this is the key question. And this is, so to show that this idea and this debate is still going on, I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of growth and the history of growth theory, and therefore also a little bit of the history of Nobel Prizes, because it turns out that there is a few prizes dedicated to economic growth. And the first one was not given to Malthus, because Malthus died long before the Nobel Prize was introduced. But the history of economic growth theory starts with Malthus. We already saw it in Fabio's picture. So put yourself in the shoes of an agricultural society, in which most of your income has to be spent on food. Most of the employment is on the land. Only very few people live in cities or have a job as a producer. In this case, of course, you can only be richer, you can only get more better living standards if you improve productivity of the land, if you improve productivity in your farm. So you might expect that if you improve productivity in agriculture, that then you start growing. But it turns out to be not the case, and we know it from Fabio's picture. It's not happening. And the reason is, well, here I give away the reason, so let's see how it works. So we've seen this picture. Suppose we get more productive lands. That means per person you can grow more crops, so you can get more food. So that's great. People feel richer. But what typically happens is that then you can feed more people. There will be more people. Families will find it easier to not lose their children. People die not so much, better diets, they live longer, and so on. But that means more people. So on the one hand, you get better productivity of the land, but at the same time, it has to be shared by more people. And that means in the end, per person, you don't get progress. And that's exactly what we saw in Fabio's picture, which I copied here, right? Per person, income doesn't rise in these societies. That's the wrong picture, button. But. So the implication is, yes, at the macro level, if you would plot income per person, you won't see the modern picture of always growth. You would see the opposite. No growth, but still you would see differences between cities. So if you think about a French city, so this case is Paris, and I deliberately picked this medieval picture from the Duc de Berry breviary. You see a very productive land, well organized. That gives lots of wealth in the city. So that means cities in France were on average much bigger than in England in medieval, late medieval time. And that was a sign of high productivity. But per person, they were all kind of on subsistence level, like people in London. So this is the picture of London. You see the tower here. It's a picture of the big fire in 1666. The theory predicts that in England, if productivity was less, then also city size would be less. So how would we escape from Malthus? How would we get out of this trap that more productivity just means more people? Well, then we go from an agricultural society to a skill-based society. Suppose you would get richer and don't allow your family to grow, but you allow your son and daughter to go to school and accumulate skills. So this is called the quality versus quantity decision. So you spend your time on schooling rather than on having more people, more hands on the farm. And this is the difference between big families and small families. And once this happens, and this is kind of a, well, this is called the demographic transition. So at some point, people chose to see that, there is better productivity, we can make a better living, but we also need our sons and daughters to have better skills, then they can have a better living. And once this was the habit in society, more productivity also meant more income per person rather than more persons themselves. And that's one explanation of why growth took off, right? But remember, there is a lot is required for this. You need a cultural change, which is part of the same type of cultural change that Mokyr was stressing in his République des Lettres. So let's go back to the history of the Nobel Prizes. So the first Nobel Prize for growth was awarded in 87 to Bob Solow. He moves to modern growth. And he asks whether industrialization, having more factories, would be a reason why we could grow. And in a way, it seems to be an obvious thing, right? Also with Mokyr, it's clear if you introduce a steam engine, you can have more factories, it's easier to produce more. Good, right? Producing more should be good. No, it's not the case. And I'm now going to show different ideas that got the Nobel Prize, but in the end show why we need the Nobel Prize for Aghion and Howitt. Yeah, so why is the first idea not so good an idea? Well, suppose you build more factories, you get more machines, more capital, that means more income per person, but it also means that every machine has less skilled workers. So at some point, it doesn't help to have more machines because, well, you know, labor gets scarce. Yeah? So that means at some point it doesn't help to add one more factory because, you know, it's only the machines you have and every next machine produces less useful stuff. So growth stops. The only way you can get better production is to not only have more machines, but also better machines, new machines, machines producing new goods. So having the science behind it like we saw in Mokyr's part. So it means not just producing more and more polluting factories in London, but switch from textile machines to paper mills, to telephones, to chip writers, different machines. That's more important than just more. Yeah? So modern growth is driven by not just more capital, but also more human capital. Think of the Malthusian, the demographic transition. More product variety, so you produce more and more goods. First we concentrated on having more textiles, then more produced goods, then more services, then everything, right? And increasing technological sophistication. This is the way modern growth works. And this is why we need to find out why productivity can introduce these new things. So the next Nobel Prize was given to Paul Romer in 2018. This happened for a paper written about the 90s. He asks, where does the new technology come from? How can it be that we introduce more and more different goods? Well, he says, maybe it's R&D, research and development by firms. They spend their money on improving production techniques, thinking about new inventions that can be introduced in the market. Well, again here, it seems like a good idea to do more R&D, but here the same mechanism can happen as with more factories. It's fine to introduce the next, well, let's say to double the amount of information you can store on your chip or the amount of pictures you can upload on your mobile phone. But next time, you want to again double it, right? In order to maintain economic growth at 2% a year, you need to double every so many years the productivity of your phone. And maybe the first time it's easy, but it gets harder and harder maybe. Unless, and that's Paul Romer's idea, unless you can develop new patents easier and easier. And this is the picture over time. So you see that in the beginning, yes, the number of patents developed in a year grows, but it can grow faster and faster. And one patent stands for one new idea or one new technology. Apparently, it becomes easier and easier to find the next patent. And the idea here is also, again, very much related to Mokyr. You build on an ecosystem with other scientists. You talk to other scientists. You learn from them. And every time one person solves a problem, it can be shared by all the other persons, and they can build on this knowledge. They can use this knowledge. And this is the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants. So if I say something new, it's never completely new. I heard it from Fabio, and I added a bit of my own, but I built on this, right? And this also works in science all the time. You build on the existing knowledge that was developed before you. So this is also called spillovers. Once I cook my meal, well, my rijstepap, it spills over. That's what I did yesterday. But in my daily life as a university professor, I try to develop knowledge that the students can use and build on it. It spills over to them. Or is this not true? So here again, it's a story all the same, right? Some person has a bright idea. Paul Romer came with this idea. Now we need to test it. Is it really true? It's a nice idea. It seems to be... so Mokyr tried to check his ideas in historical data. Now let's check it in modern data. Is it really true that it becomes easy to double the power of computers every so many years? Well, it seems yes, because here you see over time, from the 70s till now, you see how many calculations a typical computer chip can make, and it grows. It doubles every 2 years. That's Moore's law. It seems very easy to improve productivity. But here's the picture, that's the revealing picture. At the same time, the number of researchers working in the computer industry was growing very, very fast. We doubled it with a factor 100. So in order to get constant growth, we needed to send more and more of our sons and daughters towards this industry. And at some point this stops, of course. So maybe it's not so easy to grow. Maybe it's not so easy. So that's why we got the next Nobel Prize last year. It was given to Daron Acemoglu and Johnson and Robinson. They claim it's not just that you need ideas, because ideas are, well, AI even generates ideas, right? We need to employ them, and we need to make sure that people have the incentive to use them productively. And if you're living in a non-democratic society in which there is a dictator that prevents you from starting your own business, then this is never going to work. So you would be better off in an American society in which every entrepreneur can just start your own business. You can even neglect all environmental rules. Then you will really get economic growth. So this is an example that institutions, the way we organize society, matters a lot to growth. So that's why they got the Nobel Prize. And now finally, we have the story that it's not so much these rules of society, it's just creative destruction. It must be that firms do R&D and that they are allowed to replace old producers. That's the idea as we saw from Aghion and Howitt. So let's see what is the impact of Aghion and Howitt's idea. So can we use this idea to explain what's actually happening in the US, in Europe, in China, whatever? And can we explain how can we use the theory to see if we can help countries that have a slowdown in growth? Maybe some industries, can we advise some industries how they can help the transition to other types of activities and so on. So one thing we can apply it to is paradoxically the productivity slowdown. So why is this a paradox? Well, the Nobel Prize committee says these two guys get the Nobel Prize because they can match the fact that growth goes on forever with the other phenomenon that there is a lot of turbulence in markets on the firm level. Well, if you actually look at the growth rate, it's not so constant in all countries. Yes, we've seen this picture of the US, there it's growing at 2%, but typically we have some problems with maintaining growth. And especially there is some recent concerns that growth is a bit slowing down. And this picture shows it clearly, right? So the growth rate, yes, in the beginning it's not so surprising that countries like Japan or Germany grow fast after the war because this was so-called catch-up growth. They were destroyed, they had to rebuild the economy, so it was easy to grow. But then you expect that here it's about 2% always. But the past 2 decades are really a problem. We seem to lose momentum. So maybe the Nobel Prize should not be awarded, right? Because, you know, the theory is wrong. Is it? Now, the good thing about the theory is that you can go back to the micro level. You can try to find out, yes, if we do see this on a macro level, what happens to the micro level? Maybe the firms that should give way to new firms stay in business, they forget to send their workers to the new jobs, and therefore they stifle maybe innovation. And that's the way we try to think now, to see who's blocking innovation, who's stimulating innovation. Is innovation mainly coming from the type of Philips companies that are big and old, or is it coming from the new companies, the startups, our students who start up their business tomorrow? Now here is a bit of picture with this underlying dynamics that is going to go on. So over time, we see that what's called the job reallocation rate is going to slow down. So that means every year there is fewer and fewer jobs that are replaced by other jobs. So you can count the number of jobs that get lost plus the number of jobs that are created. And the bigger this number is, the better it is in view of the theory, because then you give way to more productive firms. Yeah? So, and that engine is slowing down. And there is a famous paper that's very much cited nowadays that shows 10 reasons why even in the US there is signs that this engine of replacing old firms by better new firms is slowing down. I'm not going to go through all the reasons, but there is even 10 well-documented facts that support this view. And the underlying sources, so we see that new entrants get less and less a chance to bring new patents to the market, and big firms take a bigger share of the total patenting. So you would expect the opposite. You would expect that the new steam engines that are introduced nowadays are from people, well, priests, as we just saw, completely out of the sector. They just come as a newcomer with a new, well, very beautiful invention. Well, here we see that new entrants hardly have a chance. And all patenting researchers, all engineers are employed by big firms. Well, in a way, it's not necessarily a problem unless you find out that big firms per unit invested just are less innovative. So now we also know, and this is only recently we found out, that we can really prove that it's the big firms, yeah, they do a lot of R&D, but at the same time they are not the most productive firms doing R&D. It's better to leave this to the young new guys. Wrong button again. Recently, maybe triggered by the Nobel Prize, the CPB also did a study for the Netherlands and also checked whether also this phenomenon happens in the Netherlands, and we see kind of the same thing. So productivity is slowing down. At the same time, we see less and less shifts between sectors from small to big firms and the other way around. So this engine of replacement is a bit faltering. Now, how can it be? So In a way, it's a bit strange. It was a very beautiful idea. Of course, you can only grow if you introduce new firms. Of course, jobs will only be lost if somebody else can shout, I have a better job for you, right? Goods will only be replaced if consumers see that new goods are better. So how can we get into a situation that it's actually the old dinosaurs that employ all the R&D personnel and don't innovate? How can this be? It's a bit of a paradox. And that's what we try to invent now, to analyze now. One reason could be that for big firms, it's so much easier to get funding of their investments. They know their way in the financial market, they have a reputation, they are less risky, so maybe they raise easily funds, so they have a head start relative to startups. At the same time also, big firms already dominate the current market, so they can easily set high prices as long as the new firms are not replacing them. That means they have a lot of money to spend, and they don't have an incentive to spend it very wisely. So they have too much power in the market and are not innovative enough. So what we see in practice is also that, on average, you pay too much for your goods. You pay much more than the cost, and this markup over cost is only increasing. So profit margins are only increasing over time. And at the same time, we as a worker earn less of the total income of our economies. So what are the policy implications? Can we improve this? Again, here the theory of Aghion and Howitt will help us. They will say, you know, you should make sure that entrepreneurship is stimulated, that bankruptcy should be less costly, it should be easy to start a new job, and you will only start a new firm if you know, if you fail, it's not too big a problem, right? You should be able to try out enough. Small firms must get a better chance, startups must be stimulated, human capital is important to make workers more flexible between jobs, and so on. And Europe is working on this. As you remember, 1 year ago, there was this big announcement that Europe should invest more because, you know, we are losing ground relative to China and the US. We should invest more. And then, as a side note, they said we should maybe invest more in defense and in energy. Yes, energy, I understood, because we need to make the transition. But defense, why defense? Well, we now know why, right? So invest, 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 get more productivity. So these insights, and Aghion plays himself a big role here to find out what's the best way to get the right investments. The final question, I want to spend the last minutes on the debate I often read in the newspaper, that is, are we still talking about economic growth, about productivity? Come on, this is completely old-fashioned, isn't it? We are growing too much. How can the Nobel Prize Committee grant a prize to people who say we should grow more, we are slowing down, we should speed up? We are destroying the globe. We are having so much climate problems and energy problems, resource scarcity, we are destroying the earth, we should stop growing. Almost angry that this prize was awarded to these two people. Now, I know also the other work of Aghion and Philippe, and Peter Howitt. They were the first who included chapters on growth and planetary boundaries or environmental problems in their textbooks. So I think, if anything, they see the problem that growth is not always good. Also, they show already in their first paper that got the Nobel Prize, they show that because of creative destruction, maybe we are growing too fast. And the logic is very simple. If I'm a new guy in the market, I can steal the whole market of my previous producer, right? I replace this big firm, I get the whole market. Maybe my product is only a little bit better, or I just pretend my iPhone is a bit better, my mobile phone is a bit better, and I just take over the whole market, and fashion will help me, right? That gives too much of an incentive to replace other products that are maybe just about the same. So that shows that, and they formally showed this, that welfare can be hurt by too much innovation. And finally, I think you should also see the process of greening our society, greening our economy, introducing new types of energy, introducing more sustainable textile, more sustainable production methods. All this is a matter of replacing the old world by the new world, old firms by new firms. And it's especially this theory that Aghion and Howitt have tried to think about and formalized and shown that it's happening in the data and shown where it falters and where it's stimulated. So I think we can use their ideas to say more about this transition to a green economy. Maybe the result is less growth, but at least we should create things and we should not be afraid to destroy the old positions of old firms. So my conclusion is that the theory of creative destruction tells us a lot about what is this business dynamics, why firms rise and fall. It was a beautiful model, but it can also be used to explain why things happen, why maybe sometimes growth creates more or less inequality, and it can be effective for policy advice, even if we think about greening up growth. Thank you.
So, does anyone have a question? Yes? Okay.
I'm not an economic, but how about China?
How about China? So let's try to see what happens in the lens, through the lens of the theory of creative destruction. So I think China as a planned economy, it has 5-year plans for industry. It can set the path of development. So it could decide that all power plants that have been introduced in the past will be now replaced by solar energy, for instance. So they stop planning so much building coal-driven power plants, but they now massively give way to new types of industry. So, of course, it's a different dynamic from Western economies, but in a way the idea is the same, that they allow new goods to be replacing old goods. And they do this on a massive scale, and they have maybe a bit more power to just enforce this than we do, where in our economies, typically the incumbents, the firms that are here, they protest against losing jobs and retraining their workers and so on. So that's the short answer. Is this going in the direction you expect?
Maybe you can think about the digital revolution. Is there something useful to say about that, different from the industrial revolution?
The current revolution?
Yeah.
The digital revolution? No.
Yeah.
Okay, so I talked especially about the first industrial revolution, but historically people think about different industrial revolutions. So the first one is what I talked before, steam engine, textile. There has been a so-called second industrial revolution, about 1860 until World War I, which was about electricity, or about the introduction of a steam engine, not the steam engine, sort of internal combustion engine, the cars, or bicycles. Then there has been the computing revolution. Now we're talking about AI. Although you can think in the lenses of Joel Mokyr, so I would think about AI as a sort of macro invention, which is disrupting the way we see things, we do things, which makes us more productive. What I see different from the other revolutions, which worries me, is to what extent AI will replace mankind, human jobs, into do something. So what I want to say is, think about when the computers were introduced, some jobs were displaced. Some people lost jobs because through the process of creative destructions, all firms and all jobs were replaced by computers. At the same time, computers created new skills and new jobs. So I sent my son to study computer science and make him become a computer programmer. So the process of creative destruction created also new jobs. What worries me about AI, we're already about 3 years into it, I don't see new jobs created. It looks like a full replacement, which I'm not sure yet, but that's something that sounds a bit more different. So I would say it's a big macro invention to the extent that we saw macro invention in terms of steam engine, electricity, the computer itself. More worried about what is going to be the role of humans into producing something here. I don't know if...
Well, in a way, it would be good if we are all having much more free time. Maybe we don't need to have a job anymore. We just but then, well, in practice, this never happened, right? It was always predicted, well, as many times we predicted, we get more free time and we never got it. We would earn more, we never earned more, right? But maybe in the light of the theories and the facts we reviewed today, maybe we even lose the spillovers. So if machines take over, they just repeat what already humans have brought into the data sets. The training data is provided by the steam engine developers in the past. Yes, new combinations will be found by AI, but then we need new knowledge. And the question is, can AI just combine existing knowledge, or can it really create new ideas? That is the engine of growth in the end. You need really new ideas that are the spillovers to the next inventions, the big macro inventions. So maybe AI is good for micro, but not for macro.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. I think one thing that I feel quite confident is AI won't replace human ingenuity. So given the large language models are built on. So we're going to be good in making better what we have, which may come with some job displacement, but in a way, human creativity will always be needed. That's for sure. Yeah.
And probably AI is also distributing the information more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible tool to lower access cost. So you have to think about AI as the encyclopedia, so a 21st century version of encyclopedia of Diderot d'Alembert. So these days, if you want to know, I want to make a voicing glass, you just type it into ChatGPT, you're going to get a whole set of instructions on what to do, which further reduce the access cost. You don't need to go to a library, you don't need to go to a bookstore to buy the encyclopedia, you don't need to look for the entry, you don't need to open the pages. So as it is now, it's a huge engine that reduces access cost to information.
You see, maybe see a bit of a replacement of scientific system. So because
yeah, that's a very good question.
Our jobs all the papers and so on. It takes all the time and all those readings and so on.
When I tell you, no, so there's going to be a replacement, human beings. So I think about my job, whether it's in the line or not. I guess so. As Sjak, and I really agree with him. I think as long as we are on the frontier of doing new stuff, we are doing research, we want to discover new things, I think human ingenuity will prevail. Once you want to go into teaching something that is more routine, a basic class on economics or in finance, it's no longer clear to me to what extent human is better than machine. But I think as long as teaching goes on the frontier, and we still push our research on the frontier, because we are creative, because we are unpredictable, we're going to be better and unreplaceable, at least for now, by machine.
Okay. Someone over here.
I'm also not an economist, so I'm not sure if this question is right, but I'm pretty sure that the economic growth in Japan has also slowed down quite a lot in the recent years. And I just wanted to ask, is like one of the biggest factors that also leads to economic decline the aging of the population, since they have like one of the biggest aging populations, I think, because of like the reducing birth rates and such.
Yeah, so demographic factors always play a role, and that, of course, if you think about how an economy grows, there are so many different factors that play a role. You can never say it's just the process of creative destruction, it's just the fact that we have enough scientists. You can never say this. It's too much things coming together. That maybe also explains why we already had 4 or 5 prizes on economic growth. Part of the experience of Japan, but I'm not an expert on growth in Japan, is of course that they had the war and they had to catch up. They were a relatively latecomer in the process of industrialization. They only opened up to the world economy in the 1860s, I think, so they were relatively late. They were still not at the high levels of economic production. They still had to introduce the more capitalistic way of producing in the recent history. So that explains why in the 60s they could still grow quite fast. They could easily assimilate the new technologies, adapt their factories. They massively trained their population. All this is gonna slow down at some point, and we saw this. And now I guess Japan has similar problems as Germany, for instance, in terms of aging, in terms of finding their way in the new world order. Every country that's not very big has the risk that it misses some new technological major breakthroughs that fuel their industry, right? You need to specialize in some industries. Now it seems to be good to specialize in AI types of directions. The US turns out to be good, China turns out to be good. Other countries stay a bit behind. They just hope to have the next chance if the next round of inventions comes, that they are easier to follow.
I agree with Jacques. So I think Japan is a good, like somehow Italy, after World War II, is a good model to apply the solo model. So growth through capital accumulation, which at a certain point will peter out if you don't improve technology. Let me add, so one of the works that Joel Mokyr did, which I didn't have time to talk about, it is also the idea that economic growth brings the seeds of its own destruction. To the extent that you have a successful group of entrepreneurs or leaders in certain technology that make this technology become the dominant one, then these people may have some vested interest in keeping their technology as the dominant one because they are reaping lots of benefits out of it and preventing the entrance of other people. So a bit in Japan, the growth that you observe was through capital, and the technological development was done by few companies organized themselves in big, large business groups called conglomerates, which we know that in a way starting in the 1980s, went through the 1990s, prevented the growth of newcomers, this process of creative destruction, having new guys enter into the market, killing the incumbents, that is in a way them, and bringing the country forward with new technological developments. So there has been few vested interests. So there are people in finance studying, for instance, like Japanese banks tend always to finance the old guys and never give credit to the new guys. Because maybe the bank belongs to the same industrial group of the old guy. And there's an incentive to lend to the old guy and never to the new guy. So it's a combination of solo model and which creates growth via capital accumulation. And the fact that they didn't innovate too much is also the fact that there will be few industrial conglomerates, we call them, in a way still for innovation because they protected their own monopolies.
So, I see two questions and then we round up. Okay.
What is your, thank you for the lectures both, what's your advice for Europe? You have a lot of money in the Horizon projects. Could it be the same way or has it to change? What's your ideas about it?
I think that, so to the extent that ideas are bringing technological progress, I would like to see a Europe where ideas are more able to flow into becoming an entrepreneur and trying your luck into trying to do something new, which I think has been lacking for a long time in our continent. I make you, when I was a student at Northwestern, Joel Mokyr in the first history class made a joke, saying Europe decided to substitute trench warfare with bureaucracy. There is some truth into it. So if you want ideas to end up in something that is concrete and improves the way we live, we need to leave enough freedom to people to grow and to try. So eliminating some red tapes in terms of creating more competition within the internal market, which is in the treaties, and still we are not there. Maybe rethinking a little bit how we see failure of an enterprise, which here is a very bad thing. You get a stigma. Whereas in the US, tends to be, okay, you tried, good try, you failed, it can happen, you can try another time. that would be something that would help us a lot in getting out of the impasse we are talking about now.
And of course, this is completely different from just saying everybody can do whatever he wants.
No,
just start a firm. No. Conditional having a good idea, you should get a chance.
Correct.
But what a good idea is should still be determined by enough rules like environmental protection, protection of human rights, and so on. So once you have clear rules about what makes a good product, you should give way to new firms with good ideas.
And then also,
and both things, I think Europe can do, right?
Yeah.
You can imitate the capital market from the US, and at
correct.
the same time stick to our high standards for human standards and environmental standards.
I would say that actually the very important area around here is sort of a happy island in Europe. So we see venture capital going on here. Of course, we are not at the level of Silicon Valley in California, but is one of the hopeful spots that we can see in Europe.
Yeah, last question. It's already partly been answered by your last answer, but I was just coming back to sustainability. When I heard about the destructive part of the title of this, I was thinking, is there an internal break on growth, or has it always come from external regulations? That was bothering me, that question. It would be, of course, perfect if this process as such would know its limits, or also environmentally and human rights kind of thing. Or does it also always have to be an external kind of player like politics that determine these borders? That's a bit of the question I had.
So I think also here there's many factors. So many social factors at some point stimulate growth, like more education, more access to schooling, more democratization. That all contributed to more growth, to less breaks on growth. At the same time, nature is never going to put a brake on growth itself, right? It has no vote, it cannot not be part of the negotiation table. So in that sense, we need policies to take nature into account. Maybe some sustainable initiatives of firms, so corporate social responsibility might solve, but I don't think this will happen on its own. You need some kind of regulation. I think most empirical research also points to this. It's easy to keep growing and still have strict environmental rules, for instance. There is no reason to expect that environmental rules are going to kill growth completely. They will redirect growth, but not kill growth. And if you don't put the environmental regulations, yes, maybe growth will be faster in the short run, but collapse in the long run. So in that sense, it's your scenario that nature breaks growth in the end, but too late.
Yeah, I agree with Sjak. I'm also adding to what he's saying, I also some hope still, as an economist, I guess some hopes in the market, per se. So if you remember the second graph I put, so economic growth also brings countries to be more likely to be a democracy. And in average, we know that so USSR was polluting and mistreating the environment much more than Western Europe, where, so to the extent the economic growth is making societies more democratic and more of, it's not going to resolve it. So the mere fact we really talking about regulation for the environment is because we are in a democratic society. This came with the process of economic growth. I also believe that technology, even more than regulation, at least in the medium long run, will resolve environmental problems. So at the end of the day is we need to find a way to produce less CO2. And that for me is a technological problem. We are not there yet, but hopefully soon we will be able to find a way that we filter out CO2 out of the car emissions, or we find a breakthrough in nuclear fusion where we are making small steps. So I also have somehow hope that, yeah.
So then we end this session, I suppose. So thank you very much for all the insight in the ideas of those Nobel Prize winners, and for your input in this. Thank you very much for coming, and we have one last program next Monday, tomorrow, a human rights lecture, and Monday we've got the program on polarization and community, so you're welcome also over there. Thank you, Sjak, Fabio, for doing this, and hope to see you next year for the next Nobel Prize, okay? Thank you.